Okay, let's unpack this. Um, Stop for a moment and just consider one of humanity's biggest, deepest mysteries, consciousness itself. How does anything physical, like our brains, this squishy stuff, how does that give rise to something so intangible, so personal, like the subjective experience? Why does it actually feel like something to be alive, to see the color red, or remember something from years ago?
It's a really fundamental question, yeah. And what's so interesting now is that trying to answer it has just ignited this huge scientific controversy. It's a pretty fierce debate, actually, a real clash that, reveals almost as much about science itself, how science works, as it does about the mind.
Right. And that's what our deep dive is all about today, this consciousness clash.
Mhm.
We're going to explore the main theories, the ones really battling it out. We'll get into some pretty dramatic accusations flying around, and then look at these broader calls for maybe scientific maturity in the field. But we're also going to look at something else, a really unique perspective, a unified physics take on consciousness that tries to, well, go beyond the current argument altogether.
hmm And to do that, we've gathered quite a bit of material. We've got articles, research, including insights from neuroscientists Alex Gomez-Marin and Neil Seth, plus some really groundbreaking, almost mind-bending stuff from the International Space Federation, the ISF.
Okay, so let's jump in. The heart of the clash. You can almost picture like two big opposing camps in the study of consciousness. On one side, you've got the global neuronal workspace theory, GNWT. That's the kind of classic computational idea, right?
Exactly. Yeah, GNWT basically sees consciousness as emergent. Think of it like this. Your brain's this incredibly complex computer, right? And consciousness is sort of what happens, what emerges from all that super sophisticated information processing. It's like, I don't know, the ultimate software running on the ultimate biological hardware.
Yeah.
So consciousness is basically a really advanced type of computation.
Okay. Computation.
But then on the other side, there's integrated information theory, IIT, and this is often called the consciousness first view, and it completely flips the script, doesn't it? It really does. Instead of starting with the brain and kind of hoping consciousness will pop out at the end, IIT starts with consciousness itself, with a subjective feeling, what it's like, the actual experience of being conscious. And it asks, okay, what physical things are absolutely necessary for that feeling to exist? IIT argues consciousness isn't just a side effect. It's fundamental, almost like gravity or charge, maybe. A basic property of reality.
Mm.
And it has its own causal power. It needs specific structures, specific dynamics to show up. And they try to measure this with something called integrated information, or FAE, that Greek letter AT.
So the tension is really clear then. Is consciousness just, fancy computation that arises from brain stuff? Or is it something fundamental, something inherent that systems have if they integrate information in the right way? It's a pretty stark difference.
It's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And this consciousness first idea from IIT, it leads to some, well, really counterintuitive, maybe even wild conclusions. It suggests consciousness might exist in systems we just wouldn't normally think of as conscious
Yeah.
at all.
Like what?
Well, potentially simple networks of logic gates, computer circuits, maybe even plants.
Plants. Seriously.
Yeah, or imagine a thermostat having some tiny, tiny bit of consciousness, or a whole forest feeling something collectively. You can see how that kind of idea would just, set things off.
Set things off. It sounds like it caused an explosion. It got to a boiling point, didn't it? This scientific showdown.
Yeah.
You mentioned over 100 scientists actually signed an open letter calling IIT pseudoscience. Wow, that's a really serious term to throw around in science. It's like a professional takedown, a declaration of war almost.
Oh, it absolutely is. It's a very serious accusation. And if you look at the bigger picture, the ISF research actually brings up some historical parallels here. It kind of reminds you of that infamous letter, the 100 Authors Against Einstein.
Mhm.
The point being, when powerful groups try to settle scientific truth by essentially a popularity contest or some kind of, dictatorial committee,
Mhm.
that itself can be anti-scientific. Science is supposed to progress through open debate, testing ideas, not by shutting down views you don't like.
Which is exactly why neuroscientists Alex Gomez-Marin and Anil Seth weighed in, right? They published this article in Nature Neuroscience calling for basically a ceasefire, a more productive conversation. They called it a science of consciousness beyond pseudoscience and pseudoconsciousness.
Exactly. And their take on that whole pseudoscience label is really important. They argue it's often just used as a rhetorical weapon,
Oh.
a way to shut down or delegitimize competing ideas without actually engaging with the substance. Science, they stress, is supposed to move forward by testing hypotheses against evidence, Not by consensus, not by who shouts loudest, or declaring something wrong just because it doesn't fit your favorite theory right now.
Right. And they point out history is full of examples where theories were initially laughed at, completely dismissed, but turned out to be right. Foundational, even.
Oh, absolutely.
Like continental drift people thought Wegener was crazy for decades.
Right. Or quantum entanglement. Einstein himself couldn't stand it, called it spooky action at a distance.
Yeah. Imagine if someone back then had called general relativity pseudoscience, just because they couldn't directly detect gravitational waves for, what, nearly a century. It seems absurd now.
It does. And this brings up an interesting point about Karl Popper and falsifiability. The idea that a scientific theory has to be testable, has to be potentially provable false. That's super important, obviously. But Gomez-Morin and Seth suggest that maybe for really hard problems like consciousness, where direct testing is incredibly difficult, maybe we need other philosophical tools too, just to allow the field to even explore possibilities.
And they make a crucial point. IIT isn't just philosophy. It does make testable predictions. They mention specific projects, collaborations like Cogitate and Intrepid. These are trying to actually test predictions from IIT against predictions from other theories like GNWT.
Exactly. So it's not some untestable hand-waving. It's a scientific theory that, at least in principle, you can prove wrong with experiments. It's being put to the test.
Okay, so this really gets us to the core challenge, doesn't it? The famous hard problem of consciousness. Just how do you explain that inner subjective feeling qualia using objective third-person science? It's tough because we're trying to measure the most personal thing imaginable with, external tools.
But profoundly difficult. And this whole debate, this clash, it really highlights the potential dangers of scientific tribalism, gatekeeping. The ISF research actually draws some pretty stark parallels, like Ignaz Semmelweis, the doctor who just suggested hand-washing. He was ridiculed by the medical establishment, and people died because of it.
Terrible!
Or Alfred Wegener, again, with continental drift, dismissed for decades because it upset the established geological view. What looked like consensus was actually holding back progress.
It makes you think of Einstein's supposed reply to that 100 authors letter. If I were wrong, one would have been enough.
Right. That's the spirit. And Carl Sagan, he didn't believe in astrology at all, but he famously refused to sign some big statement condemning it because he thought the tone was too authoritarian, too unscientific.
That speaks volumes. It's about intellectual generosity, maybe, being open-minded even when you strongly disagree.
Precisely. And that's what Gomez-Morin and Seth are really pushing for. Epistemic humility. Recognizing what we don't know. And maybe some metaphysical pluralism, allowing different fundamental assumptions for a while. I mean, this field, the serious scientific study of consciousness, it's only really been going for maybe 3 decades.
That's not long at all in scientific terms.
Not at all. It's practically brand new. So they're essentially saying, look, we barely know anything yet. Let's keep all reasonable options on the table and explore.
So given how young the field is, maybe openness to different ideas, even counterintuitive ones, is just essential right now.
The authors argue we need that balance. Be open to weird ideas, but also be really rigorous in how we test them. We have to be willing to be surprised.
Okay, so we've seen the clash, the controversy, the call for maybe a more mature, humble approach. But what if the whole debate, GNWT versus IIT, is still missing something fundamental? What if the answer isn't just in our heads, but somehow part of the fabric of reality itself? This is where our sources point us next towards this really different framework the ISF, the International Space Federation, has been developing, a unified physics approach.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting and maybe a bit mind-bending. The ISF's work takes a hard look at computational functionalism, like GNWT. And they argue it fundamentally fails to bridge what philosophers call the explanatory gap.
The gap between physical stuff and subjective feeling.
Exactly. They say no matter how complex you make the computation, these models don't actually explain why it feels like something to be conscious, why there's that what it's like lurseness. It just doesn't cross that bridge. Still a ghost in the machine, in a way.
And they also challenge our basic idea of what material even is, right? It's not just tiny billiard balls.
Not at the quantum level, no. It's vastly different. It's dynamic. It's packed with information. They argue that if you really want to reduce consciousness down, you can't stop at neurons. That's not fundamental enough.
Where do you have to go?
All the way down. To the quantum level of atoms, even to the vacuum state of the quantum field itself, where particles bubble in and out of existence. Down there, what we call matter, is this incredibly vibrant, information-rich. Substance isn't even the right word. It's more like a dynamic network. Forget billiard balls. Think a shimmering web of interconnected information.
Okay, wow. This sounds pretty out there. The ISF work describes the brain as, what was it? A system of nested harmonic oscillators, coupling across scales. That's a mouthful.
It is a bit, yeah. But think of it like an incredibly complex orchestra. Every part of your brain, down to the molecules, it's like a different instrument, vibrating at different frequencies. But they're all connected, influencing each other, creating these complex harmonies across different scales, from large brain areas down to tiny molecular levels. And they describe the whole system, the brain body, as being like a very sensitive antenna.
An antenna.
Yeah, highly tuned. And maybe, just maybe, it's tuning into information flows happening at the very, very smallest scale of reality, the Planck scale, the absolute basement level of space and time. It's involved in this constant feedback loop, processing information, maybe interacting with fundamental fields, almost like how electromagnetic and gravitational fields interact.
Okay, Planck scale antenna. This is leading somewhere specific, isn't it? This unified space memory network idea, a network for consciousness, not just in the brain, but woven into space-time itself.
That's the core idea, yeah. They propose that space-time, at the Planck scale, has this incredibly complex, multiply-connected geometry. Imagine the very fabric of reality isn't smooth, but it's interconnected in this profound way, made of countless microscopic connections, almost like tiny wormholes. Micro wormholes, yeah. An unimaginable number of them, forming this vast quantum network that allows for information to be exchanged instantly, non-locally, across the universe. It's like an internet built into the structure of existence itself.
So this goes beyond John Wheeler's idea of quantum foam.
It builds on it, yeah.
Yeah.
Wheeler imagines space-time at that scale as being foamy, turbulent. The ISF model gives it more structure, proposes this specific network geometry, and even provides calculations for the density of these connections and how they might relate to information processing, to consciousness.
Okay, so how does consciousness fit in? Is it the network itself?
Their model suggests consciousness is actually intrinsic to how this network processes information, to the recursive encoding and feedback loops happening within this quantum space-time micro wormhole network. Essentially, the structure of space-time itself has a built-in capacity for memory and information processing, what they call it space memory. It's like a universal memory embedded in the quantum vacuum's entanglement.
Right.
And here's the really radical part. In this view, your brain and body aren't creating consciousness from scratch.
They're receiving it.
More like acting as a transceiver and a transducer. It receives information from this fundamental conscious network, processes it, translates it, and then expresses it as your unique personal conscious experience.
Wow. Okay, so my brain isn't the source of the broadcast. It's the radio receiver tuning into the signal and playing the music that is my consciousness. That is a huge shift in perspective.
A massive shift.
How does that connect back to IoT? Because IoT also talks about information integration being key.
It connects surprisingly well, actually. The ISF model agrees that information integration is crucial, just like IoT says. But it suggests that the primary integration happens through the fundamental connectivity of this space memory network itself, this underlying fabric. The brain's activity then reflects and utilizes that deeper integration. So it kind of provides a potential physical mechanism for how consciousness could be fundamental, like IIT suggests, while also explaining how complex biological systems like brains evolve to access and express it in sophisticated ways, which relates to what GNWT observes.
So, okay, let's try to wrap our heads around this unified physics idea from the ISF. Consciousness isn't just brain computation, and it isn't just starting with the feeling. It's somehow a fundamental characteristic of space-time itself, of its information dynamics.
That's the essence of it, yeah. It's not just something we humans or even animals do. It's something the universe does at its most basic level. And we're plugged into that. We participate in it.
Which might explain why consciousness feels so deeply personal, so uniquely mine, but also sometimes feels like it connects to something much bigger, something universal.
Exactly. It potentially offers a framework to understand how our inner subjective world relates to the objective physical reality. It could bridge the gap between physics, biology, and that first-person experience in a really profound, unified way.
We have covered a lot of ground today. Quite a journey, from that really heated scientific clash, computation versus something fundamental.
GNWT versus IIT.
Right. To this call for more humility, more maturity in how we even approach the question. And then finally diving into this really deep, unified physics idea that consciousness might be woven right into the fabric of space-time.
It's a lot to take in. But this deep dive, it really matters beyond just the labs and neuroscience journals, doesn't it? I mean, how we understand consciousness affects everything. How
Yeah.
we treat animals, potentially how we approach advanced AI in the future.
Huge ethical questions there.
Massive. And medical ethics, too. Think about patients in comas or minimally conscious states.
Mm-hmm.
How we define consciousness changes how we care for them.
Yeah.
Even our understanding of mental health conditions can be transformed if our basic view of the mind shifts.
So for you listening, maybe as non-specialists, this whole controversy, this exploration, it's maybe a powerful reminder, an opportunity to think about these big questions, maybe with a bit more intellectual generosity, a bit more humility about how much we still don't know about this core aspect of being alive.
Yeah. And I love how Gomez, Marin, and Seth ended their article, paraphrasing the poet Rumi. They said, beyond ideas of pseudoscience and pseudo-consciousness, there's a field. Let's meet there.
Hmm.
It's really an invitation, isn't it? To
Yeah.
step back from the arguments for a moment and just wonder, to appreciate the mystery.